Dear God, who did this to you? Jonathan Carrington whispered, the words falling from his mouth before he could stop them. The black girl at the base of the old oak tree barely moved. She was in a white wedding dress, now torn and stained with dirt and blood, her brown skin marked with bruises and cuts. Heavy chains wrapped around her wrists and ankles, bolted into the thick roots like she was some wild thing someone had decided to trap. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and glassy, and locked on his face with pure terror. Jonathan slowly lifted his hands to show they were empty. Hey, he said softly, fighting the shake in his voice. I'm not here to hurt you. My name is Jonathan. I live just over that ridge. My son and I were walking and we saw you. Behind him, a small shape stepped on a twig with a sharp crack. His 9-year-old boy, Elijah, stood frozen a few feet away, clutching a stuffed dinosaur to his chest. His wide eyes locked on the girl in the chains. Don't call them, the girl rasped, her voice like broken glass. Her lips trembled, and every word seemed to cost her. Please, if they hear you, if he hears you. She tried to pull back, and the metal bit into her skin, making her cry out. Jonathan's heart clenched at the sound. Who? He asked gently. Who did this? The girl closed her eyes for a moment, and tears slid down the sides of her face, disappearing into the dirty lace of her dress. My fiancé, she whispered. His family. They said if I ran again, they'd make sure I never walked out of these woods. Wind moved high in the trees, making the leaves hiss. Jonathan looked around, every muscle tight, half expecting men in suits to step out from behind the trunks. No one came. Only Elijah, quiet as always, moved closer. Without speaking, the boy knelt just out of reach of the chains and pulled a folded paper from his pocket. It was a simple crayon drawing of 3 stick figures under a big green tree, all holding hands. He laid it near her fingers, then backed away. The girl stared at it like it was the first gentle thing she'd seen in a very long time. What's your name? Jonathan asked, his voice firmer now, like he needed something to hold on to. Grace, she said. Grace Holloway. Her breathing came in short, shaky pulls. Please, don't leave me here. Jonathan swallowed hard and reached for the small multi-tool he kept clipped at his belt, his mind racing. He was a billionaire, owner of half the land in this part of North Georgia, a man used to fixing problems with money and lawyers and long emails. But none of that meant anything out here in the dirt with this broken girl in a wedding dress. I'm going to try to get you out, he told her. It might hurt, but I promise, we're going home today, not leaving you in these woods. The chain links were thick and old, rust mixed with fresh marks where they had rubbed her skin raw. He pressed the tool into the padlock, hands steady now, by pure force of will. Behind him, Elijah moved closer again, this time touching the tree with his small palm like he was trying to calm it too. The lock finally snapped with a loud click that echoed through the trees. Grace flinched, then stared in shock as the chain around her wrists fell loose into the dirt. By the time Jonathan carried Grace into his farmhouse, his arms burned, but he didn't dare put her down. Elijah trotted beside him, holding the front door open with both hands, his face tight, with a strange mix of fear and focus. The house smelled like coffee and old wood, with toys and books scattered along the hallway. Nothing about it, said Billionaire, except maybe the huge windows and the quiet land stretching outside. But right now, it just felt like a safe place. Jonathan laid Grace gently on the couch, then grabbed an old army medic kit from the hall closet. I used to patch people up overseas, he said, more to fill the silence than anything. Let me clean these, okay? Grace nodded weakly, eyes scanning the room as if danger might crawl out from behind the furniture. Where is this? She whispered. Carrington Farm, he answered. About 3 miles from where we found you. Closest neighbor is a mile away. Nobody comes out here unless I invite them. Elijah disappeared and came back with a pillow, placing it behind Grace's head like it was the most important job in the world. She gave him a small, tired smile, then winced as Jonathan dabbed the cuts on her wrists with warm water and soap. "You said your fiancé did this," he said carefully. "Why?" She let out a shaky laugh that held no humor. "Because I told him no," she said. "Because I told him I wouldn't marry into his family and hand them my life on a plate." Her gaze drifted to the ceiling as if she could still see the place she had run from. "We were in Atlanta this morning, big hotel, flowers everywhere. They put this dress on me like armor. My stepfather said it was the chance of a lifetime. Girls like you don't get offers like this. Grace, you better say thank you. But it wasn't a wedding. It was a deal." Jonathan wrapped clean bandages around her wrists, his jaw tightening. "A deal for what?" he asked. She looked at him then, really looked, taking in his worn flannel shirt, his neat beard, his watch that costs more than most people's cars. "For my body," she said quietly. "For what's in my blood." "Their family owns some kind of medical company," Grace continued, her words coming slow but clear. "They test people who work for them. I guess my mom signed me up when I was little, just for some extra money. They found something in my blood, some rare marker, said my body fights off sickness in a special way. They acted like I was a miracle. But miracles don't end up in chains." Her fingers curled in the blanket. "When my mom died, my stepfather took over, started talking to them about opportunity and security and legacy. Next thing I know, I'm engaged to Thomas Albright, heir to Albright Labs, like I'm part of a business plan." Jonathan felt his stomach churn at the company name, Albright Labs. He knew it. He'd seen it on investor reports, charity dinners, clean glossy brochures about saving lives. He didn't say anything, just kept his face calm as he taped the bandage. "Why didn't you go to the police?" he asked. Grace let out a rough breath. "Because they own half of them. Because the sheriff's brother works for their security team. Because last time I tried to tell someone, I ended up with a doctor's note saying I was emotionally unstable. Easier to say the girl's crazy than say the rich man is a monster." Jonathan sat back on his heels and scrubbed a hand over his face. He had built his fortune in tech, then poured money into good causes that made him feel like he was fixing a broken world. Health, education, clean water, all the right words. Albright Labs had been one of the first big bio companies to ask for his support. They said they were working on cures, on better futures. He remembered the fancy dinners, the speeches about changing lives. He had believed them, or maybe he had just wanted to. "Grace," he said slowly, "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." Her eyes narrowed. "What?" He swallowed. "I know that company. I've invested in it. I sit on one of their advisory boards." For a second, the whole room seemed to stop. Elijah had been lining toy cars along the rug. His hand froze on a blue truck. Grace's face went ice cold. "You?" she whispered. "You're with them?" She pushed herself up on shaking elbows, fear turning to raw anger. "Did you bring me here so they could come pick me up? Is this just another place to keep me locked up?" "No," Jonathan said quickly, hands up. "Grace, listen to me. I had no idea this was happening. I've never heard of you, or this wedding, or any of that. They showed me labs and charts, and smiling photos of kids getting better. They never showed me this." He gestured weakly to her torn dress, the faint ring of bruises on her neck where a rough hand had grabbed her. Grace let out a harsh breath that sounded like a broken sob. "Of course they didn't," she said. "Men in suits don't like to get their hands dirty. They pay other people to hold the chains." Her words cut straight through him. He thought of all the meetings he'd sat in, all the times he'd skimmed reports and signed his name at the bottom, trusting the experts, trusting that money, once given, would stay clean. "You want to call them?" she asked, voice low. "Call Thomas. Call his daddy. Tell them you found their runaway bride and you did your duty like a good partner." Jonathan stared at her and realized this was the moment that would decide the rest of his life. He could do what rich men always did when things got ugly. Step back, let lawyers spin stories, say he didn't know. Or he could do something else, something that would burn bridges he had spent years building. He stood slowly and walked to the small desk in the corner of the room, where a neat stack of mail waited. On top was a glossy envelope he hadn't opened yet, stamped with the Albright Labs logo. He held it up so Grace could see. "They sent me an invite," he said quietly, "to your wedding. Wanted me on the front row, so cameras could catch the support." Her face twisted in disgust. He tore the envelope in half, then again, letting the pieces fall into the trash can. "I'm not calling them," he said. "I'm calling someone else." He picked up his phone and scrolled to a number he rarely used, one that made his chest tight every time he saw it. A lawyer in D.C. who'd once told him, "If you ever find out your money hurts someone, you better be brave enough to say it out loud." As the phone rang, Grace watched him with a mix of doubt and something softer, like she wanted to believe him but didn't know how. Elijah slid closer to the couch, his small hand resting lightly near her arm but not touching, giving her space to move away if she needed. "Evelyn," Jonathan said when the call picked up. "It's John. I need help. Now." He listened for a moment, then said, "I found a girl in the woods, in a wedding dress, chained. She says one of my partner companies owns her life. I think she's right." There was a long pause on the other end. Then a clear, firm voice said, "Okay. First, you keep her safe. Second, you write down everything. Third, you get ready to walk into fire." He hung up and turned back to Grace. "That was a civil rights lawyer," he said. "She doesn't work for them. She works against people like them. She's on her way." Grace stared at him. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You could lose everything." Jonathan nodded. "Maybe I should. Maybe I've had everything for too long while people like you had nothing. If my money helped build a cage, then my money is going to tear it down." The next hours moved fast. Jonathan took photos of Grace's injuries, careful to ask each time before he raised the camera. Grace told her story in pieces while he typed on his laptop, getting down names, dates, places. Elijah sat nearby, drawing picture after picture of trees, houses, and a girl with curly hair standing between them. When Evelyn arrived, she swept into the house with a worn briefcase and calm eyes that missed nothing. She was a black woman, in her 40s, dressed in jeans and a blazer, with silver threads in her hair that made her look even more solid, like a tree that had seen more than one storm. She'll listen to Grace without interrupting, her pen moving fast across a yellow pad. When Grace finished, voice hoarse, Evelyn sat back and let out a low breath. "They're not just cruel," she said. "They're smart. They used the law like a knife." She turned to Jonathan. "You funded them?" It wasn't a question. He met her eyes. "Yes," he said, "and I'm ready to stand up and say that out loud." Evelyn nodded once. "Good, because that's the only way this works." She spread out papers on the coffee table. "Here's the good news. Marriage does not erase a person's right to say no to medical use of their body. They wanted you to believe that, Grace, but it's a lie. The bad news is, they have money, friends in high places, and a head start on their story. They'll call you crazy. They'll call you a liar. They'll say you're after their fortune." Grace's tired eyes flashed. "I don't want their money," she said. "I want my life." Elijah, who rarely spoke, looked up from his drawing. In a small, clear voice he said, "You can have ours." All three adults turned to him, stunned. It was the first full sentence he'd said since his mother died 3 years ago. Grace's hand flew to her mouth. Jonathan's eyes filled with tears he didn't bother to hide. "You heard him," Jonathan said softly. "You have our house, our help, our fight. You're not alone anymore." The next week was a blur of plans and pushes. Evelyn filed emergency papers to keep Grace hidden and safe. Jonathan called reporters. He used a charm at charity galas, this time for a far different reason. Some hung up, some listened. One from a major network in New York said, "If what you're saying is true, this could blow the roof off the whole industry." While lawyers worked behind the scenes, Grace learned the rhythm of the farmhouse. She helped Elijah feed the chickens, moving slow but a little stronger every day. She sat at the big wooden table and went over her story with Evelyn again and again, building it like a bridge she could walk across without falling apart. At night, nightmares still tore her from sleep, but now, when she woke, there was a lamp on in the hall. Soft footsteps, a glass of water in Jonathan's hand, a quiet, "You're safe. He's not here." When the day came to go public, the sky over Atlanta was bright and sharp, the air buzzing with summer heat. Jonathan had rented a small hall instead of a fancy hotel ballroom. He didn't want polished floors and glittering lights. He wanted a plain room where the truth could sit without costumes. Cameras lined the back wall, red lights blinking. Reporters murmured, shuffling papers, checking their phones. On the small stage, there were 3 chairs and 1 microphone. Jonathan stepped up first. He wore a simple dark suit, no tie, his face lined with real fear and something like peace. "My name is Jonathan Carrington," he began. "You know me as a businessman and donor. Today I'm here as something else. I'm here as a man who helped fund a company that hurt people. I'm here to say I was wrong." The room quieted fast. You could almost hear pens stop scratching. "Albright Labs came to me with pretty charts and hopeful stories," he continued. "I saw what I wanted to see. I did not ask what I should have asked. A few days ago, I found a young woman chained to a tree in a wedding dress. She said my partners did that to her. I believe her. You need to hear her." Grace's legs shook as she walked up to the microphone, but her back was straight. She wore jeans and a plain blue blouse, not the dress. She had refused to ever wear it again. Her wrists still showed faint lines where the chains had rubbed them. Cameras zoomed in. She took a breath that felt as if it might break her chest, then spoke into the mic. "My name is Grace Holloway," she said, voice low but clear. "I'm not crazy. I'm not missing. I'm not a story they get to tell without me." She told them about her mother working as a cleaner in the Albright building, about the free health tests that came with her job, about the way the doctors had smiled at Grace like she was a project, not a person. She told them about the wedding invites she never wanted, the ring she never chose, the way her stepfather had said, "This is what girls like you dream of," while signing papers he refused to let her read. She told them about the forest, about the chains, about the pain and the fear, and the way she had decided, even while tied to that tree, that if she ever got free again, she would never be quiet. When she finished, the room was so silent it almost hurt. Then questions came like bullets. "Miss Holloway, why should we believe you over a respected medical family? Mr. Carrington, are you prepared to lose your whole company over this? Do you have proof?" That was when Evelyn stepped up, dropping a thick folder onto the table with a dull, heavy sound. "Yes," she said. Inside were copies of emails, contracts, test records, even a draft memo from an Albright lawyer that said, in cold, simple words, marriage will secure lifetime rights to subjects' genetic material with reduced risk of legal action. The reporters grabbed at the pages, eyes widening as they read. Somewhere across town, in a tall glass building, phones started ringing like alarms. Albright Labs released a statement within hours, calling Grace an unstable former employee, and Jonathan misinformed. But the words tasted thin compared to the images of Grace's bruises and Jonathan's tears on live TV. The fight that followed was long and loud. There were court dates, angry news panels, smear pieces, calling Grace a liar, a gold digger, a troubled young woman out to ruin good men. But there were also marches outside Albright offices, letters from church groups and school kids and nurses who had seen too much. Other women began to come forward, voices shaking, stories blending into a pattern that was too clear to ignore. They said my sickness was a blessing for them. They said if I married in, my family would be taken care of forever. They told me I was crazy when I tried to say no. Jonathan sat in hearings and said, again and again, I helped pay for this. I will help pay to fix it. Board members stepped down. Government agents opened files that had gathered dust. The company's bright logo started to look less like hope and more like a warning. 1 year later, on a cool fall morning in Washington, D.C., Grace stood in front of a room full of lawmakers in dark suits. The walls were lined with flags. Cameras pointed at her, live lights glowing. Elijah and Jonathan watched from the second row, side by side, Elijah's small hand tucked into Jonathan's big one. Miss Holloway, the senator at the center, said, "You may begin." Grace looked down at the notes she had written the night before, then set them aside. "I grew up thinking rich men lived on some other planet," she said, "like they were above us, untouchable. But I learned the hard way that their hands reach right into our homes, our bodies, our blood, if no one tells them no." She told the committee everything again, but this time, it wasn't just about her. It was about every girl whose name was in those files. Every woman who had been told her body was a gift only if someone else owned it. When she finished, her voice shook, but she did not look away. "You asked me here to talk about what went wrong," she said. "I'm telling you this. It went wrong the moment we decided some lives were worth more than others. The justice that finally came wasn't perfect, but it was real." Albright Labs was broken apart and sold off in pieces under strict rules. Thomas Albright was sentenced 2 years in prison for kidnapping, fraud, and abuse. Grace testified at his trial, looking him in the eye as she said, "I forgive myself for ever thinking I was yours." Jonathan lost a huge part of his fortune, but he never complained. He sold downtown condos he no longer cared about and used the money to start a fund for anyone hurt by the company's work. He hired teams to go into small towns and poor neighborhoods, not to sell anything, but to listen. Elijah, who once hid inside his own silent world, now walked beside Grace at rallies, holding a little sign he had drawn himself that said, in big, shaky letters, "We are not property." Back at the farm one evening, as the sun slid low and turned the fields gold, Grace sat on the porch steps with Elijah pressed against her side. He stared up at her, then at the sky. "You're not chained anymore," he said quietly. She smiled and kissed the top of his head. "No, baby," she said, "I'm not." Jonathan came out with 3 mugs of hot cocoa, handing one to each of them. For the first time in a long time, Grace let herself lean back and simply feel the soft night air, the safe weight of a child against her, the steady sound of a man who had chosen to ruin his own comfort rather than let her suffer alone, somewhere far beyond their land. People were still fighting, still hurting, still telling their stories, but the chain that had held her was broken, and the pieces had cut the hands that once pulled it tight. As the stars blinked on over the quiet Georgia fields, Grace knew this as deeply as she knew her own name. Real power isn't money or titles. Real power is using what you have to break someone else's chains.